We've been talking about the world economic or capitalist system primarily from a materialist point of view. Let's take a look at how culture or cultural flows operate in our increasingly global world. Arjun Appadurai has used spatial images, or scapes, as in landscapes, to identify what he sees as key global flows in the contemporary world. Ethnoscapes, the landscapes of persons who constitute the shifting world in which people live, particularly people on the move. Mediascapes, the global distribution of images and narratives generated by the media. Technoscapes, the global configuration of technologies moving at high speeds across previously impermeable borders. Financescapes, the global grid of currency speculation and capital transfer. Ideascapes, ideologies of states and counter-ideologies of movements around which nation-states have organized their political cultures. One example of these various global scapes might be the global sports industry as manifested by the Olympic Games or the Soccer World Cup. These global cultural festivals result in the massive movement of people, technologies, money, media images, and even ideas around the planet. Of course, in our globalizing world, we can no longer assume the isomorphism of people, place, and culture. In other words, some people in a given place may draw their cultural inspiration from other places. This would include, for example, Ghanaian Pentecostal Christian immigrants living, working, and praying in southwestern Ohio, where I live. They may draw much of their inspiration from churches and communities back home. At the same time, of course, Pentecostal Christianity itself is both local and global, and so cannot easily be confined to a specific place. Ghanaian Christians in Ghana may attend revivals led by U.S. or Nigerian preachers, while in the U.S. they may attend services led by Ghanaian pastors from Accra or watch Ghanaian religious films on DVD or via the internet. Thus, people, technologies, and ideas are on the move. Is this new? Surely not. Christians and Christianity, for example, have been moving since the beginning. The conquest of the Americas was also justified by European Christians who sought to convert, colonize, and seize resources. What is new, thanks to global information and transportation technology, is the rapid movement of material goods and people and the instantaneous movement of ideas and money. How have scholars sought to theorize the impact of global cultural How have scholars sought to theorize the impact of global culture? First, we can speak of cultural differentialism. Some scholars argue that we're experiencing a clash of civilizations in which deep cultural differences generate conflict and rivalry. They see the world divided into distinct opposed cultural regions, such as the West, the Islamic world, the Chinese, the Hindu, etc. Other scholars see globalization as a type of cultural homogenization or westernization. According to this approach, the entire planet is being overrun by consumer capitalism that breeds sameness, hence McDonaldization. A third approach emphasizes cultural complexity. We're experiencing a period of rapid cultural diffusion and mixing of identities, values, and other cultural forms. But this process is not leading to homogenization, but rather hybridity or complex cultural mixing. Hybridity can take place in very different ways around the world. Moreover, localities around the planet experience globalization differently and appropriate elements of global cultural flows in locally specific ways. Let's take a look at one example from my research in northern Gabon. Here we see a so-called traditional ceremony designed to locate and remove poisons that have been buried by a spiteful kinsman to harm the village. The ritual expert in the center is Muslim and wears a white caftan, but white caftans are also the garb of this particular African spiritual practice, which combines African and Christian spirituality. He holds a civet cat skin in his right hand, long a ritual implement in Gabonese ceremonies, but a radio antenna in his right hand through which he listens to the spirits who guide his actions. You can't see the logo, but he's also wearing a New York Yankees baseball cap. Here we have cultural hybridization in a particular locale. Let's go back to our three cultural frameworks for a moment: differentialism, homogenization, and complexity. Let's go back to our three cultural frameworks for a moment: differentialism, homogenization, and complexity, to see how they use the culture concept. According to differentialism, culture is essential, long-lasting, and unchanging. Globalization is seen as a threat that leads to the clash of civilizations. According to homogenization, culture is superficial, erasable, and is being erased by globalization. Globalization is leading inevitably to a flattening of the world. India is becoming Europe, is becoming Latin America, is becoming New York. According to complexity, culture is generative and mutable or changeable. It is being mixed or hybridized, leading to global cultural complexity. So which one is right? Maybe all of them. In short, cultural globalization is so complex that one theoretical framework is insufficient to capture the range of processes taking place. Let's review cultural processes as they relate to globalization. Resistance includes intercultural conflict and assertion of local identities, often in strident forms, as groups and nations seek to keep globalization at bay. One example would be Osama bin Laden's and Al-Qaeda's radical efforts to resist Western presence in the Arabian Peninsula. Localization has to do with the appropriation and transformation of cultural materials to suit local needs. Earlier, we saw how Pokemon had been localized in specific ways in Egypt. Hybridity occurs when elements of two or more cultural repertoires combine to form a new cultural form. Homogenization entails the emergence of global cultural uniformity, cultural differences reduced to styles. We've already spoken of McDonaldization above. Resistance can be one dimension of the clash of civilizations. The spread of Euro-American capitalism and lifeways throughout the world has created disenchantment, alienation, and resentment among many other cultural systems. After a visit to the US in the 1920s, Sayyid Qutb argued that Western ideas of modernity were incompatible with Islam. He went on to play a leading role in the Muslim Brotherhood, which sought to resist Western influences in Egypt. The McDonaldization framework argues that under the powerful influence of corporate culture, the world is becoming culturally homogeneous. Fast food culture, with its principles of mass production, speed, standardization, and impersonal service, is taken to be the model for this new global culture. Also called creolization and syncretism, hybridization occurs when two or more cultural elements combine to form something new. In Egypt, computer dating became computer matchmaking. Families fill out the forms, not individuals, and the billing is like that of the traditional katba or matchmaker. Localization refers to the appropriation and transformation of global cultural elements into local cultural contexts. In closing, let's touch very briefly on the anthropology of development, which can be seen as one way to assist local communities, groups, and individuals to adapt to the changing world. But even the anthropology of development can illustrate an external or edict perspective or more of a local emic perspective. In the traditional approach to the anthropology of development, the anthropologist sought to help make development projects and programs work better. In the past, many development projects have failed because they did not involve the local people or listen to them. In our globalizing world, how can development projects make sense for local conditions rather than trying to make everybody more like the West? To conclude, let's take the example of sugarcane processing. It's difficult and slow to extract cane juice by hand, or even with a hand press, as pictured on the lower left. On the right, we see a simple press operated by hand which requires no electricity or fuel. This could be seen as an appropriate form of technology that allows these merchants in Bangladesh to sell fresh cane juice.